Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 3. So we are going to work on cleaning up the sides and getting the heel and tail blocks in. And also cutting off the ends of this. So I've been working the last few minutes on getting these cleaned up. One of the things I use quite a bit are these sanding backers. So these rounded ones can just fit around almost any contour. So when we've got the waist, the upper bout, just about anything we can fit around these. This is one of my super handy scraper tools, a razor blade. You can also get the ones that are squared off on the edge. I use both of them quite a bit, and just depending on which job I'm doing. This one works great to get into the corners, real tight little corners, but it can also gouge if you're not careful. So I do use both of them. One of the things that I do use is just a big piece of foam for support. When you've got these curved kind of delicate ends, I'll typically hold them both together to offer a little bit more support. Put this up against the edge and use this to scrape on. I try not to sand directly onto my bench, but I'll use a piece of carpet, piece of foam, just anything to protect that a little bit. Give these curves a little bit of support. Now what we're going to do is get these back in the mold. We're going to mark them off for the blocks and then get them cut off. And don't forget about the cabinet scraper. This is a great tool to use for scraping the sides on the inside and outside. I try to keep all my blocks and grits separate so I mark them 100, keep the 100 grit on, different block for 150, different block for 120, 180, so that the grits don't get messed up. And then I switch paper. I put 180 on a block that I used to have 100 on. There's still grits left over, and it sands 100 grit back into something I'm trying to do 180 as things get closer to the finishing process. And we are going to start sanding things and prepping them for final sanding and finishing. It's going to be super important to keep all of your grits separate, because those things do become very important, especially in the finish and in getting a nice flat surface for our finish to sit on, and even doing the finish themselves. Those lower grits can contaminate the higher grits, and you can end up chasing a grit, and you can chase some scratches, and you'll have to start all over. So just be careful about mixing up the grits. Not as important now, later it will be, but it's always a good idea. Now to start marking out our sides, to cut them off, we want to reference again our top side. The side for the top, remember we jointed that. It's nice and flat, so I have that down on the bench. And actually I have to loosen this up just a little bit. Give myself, flatten those out. We're marking the centers here and here. Now with these, I like to use a mechanical pencil or a very sharp white colored pencil. I use mechanicals because I break leads a lot, and I just do a couple clicks. It's a nice fine point. I know exactly where that is. So I have this one marked. I'm going to spin it around, this side right there. And I'm going to take a square, I'm going to transfer those around. When you do take these out, be sure that you support them, because there's going to be a lot of spring tension on them, and they're going to want to push themselves out, and they could snap, crack, do all sorts of bad stuff. So just be very careful. Now this one, you can see I've got it marked here. Now we're going to grab our square, and we have the edge that I know is going to be the top. I'm going to transfer that all the way around. Now we're going to mark this one. Got it adjusted. Now this side's laying flat. Everything looks good. So we are going to transfer those same marks. When you're pulling these out, push in on the ends just a little bit so that you're not letting them press against the outside mold with this tip, because that can crack. Right along here, they're just a little bit delicate and they can crack very easily. Take our square, make sure we're referencing the side that we want to use for the top. Transfer that around. Perfect. Now the reason I transfer this all the way around the edge is because we need to use this center to get it on here, and then this side to get it onto here, because we can't run it through the bandsaw this way, or at least not very easily. Much easier to run it through the bandsaw this way. Now that we've got our sides trimmed down to where they need to be, we need to cut and install the blocks. So we've got two blocks. One is the tail block. The tail block is going to go down here on the end, also known as the end block. Where the end wedge goes, the end pin goes on the outside, and also if you have any electronics, they'll typically go out through the end block and attach on that side. So it does have to be very strong. Plus, that is where the guitar gets set down on. If you drop it, it usually gets dropped on that end. It takes a beating. The other block is the heel block, which is going to go here in the upper bout, which is what the neck attaches to. One of the things we need to remember is that on both of the blocks, the grain should be going sideways, which is the same direction as the sides, because if we connect the sides together here, and they're going to meet in the middle, once those sides want to start pulling apart, this is not going to let that happen. If the grain was this way and they wanted to pull apart, they could potentially crack down the grain lines. So we're not going to do that. We're going to put it this way. Let's go over to our plans and take a look at our measurement. Our plans call for the tail block to be 76 millimeters wide by 19 millimeters thick. And I don't know if I mentioned this on these plans before, but these plans are one-to-one. They are actual size, so we can take measurements directly off of all of these plans, transfer that, and that's exactly what we're going to want to cut. And if we go to our heel block is going to measure 70 millimeters wide by about 32 millimeters thick. Our actual measurement, we have got about 78 millimeters wide by 35 millimeters thick. We've only got 2.5 millimeters, 3 millimeters to take off. We could take that down with a plane. Most likely we'll just take care of that with a bandsaw and true it up with a hand plane. Our actual dimensions on our tail block are about 76 millimeters wide by 25 millimeters thick. So a little bit to take off of that thickness, but we're actually very close on the size. We might not have to do anything but scrape those with the hand plane, and that'll take care of those. So let's go cut these to size. On the tail block, I actually use plywood. I know, right? This is Baltic birch plywood from your big box store. And this is Baltic birch plywood from your local specialty woodworking shop. So you can see a huge difference, right? In this one, we've got 5 layers plus a thin veneer on each side. And this one, I think we're at 13 layers. If I've got my end pin coming through, or I've got an electronics coming through and it gets dropped on it, this is going to be less susceptible to cracking than a solid piece of wood. But again, nothing wrong with it. I'm going to show you how to use this. So I cut this down exactly to the sizes on the plans. We are going to work it exactly like we would as if it was mahogany. You guys are going to use mahogany. It's going to be great. This one, I'm just using this to give you another option. We're going to shape it, sand it, scrape it, and do everything to it just like we would the mahogany. For the heel block, this is quite a bit oversized. What we need to do is to get this down to about 70 millimeters wide and 32 millimeters thick. So where are we at? We are at about 78 millimeters wide. We need to take that down a little bit. And then we are about 34 millimeters thick. We need to just take a couple of millimeters off of that. We could actually probably just sand that off. I'm going to do it with the bandsaw just to show you guys how I push these through. And then we will get this down to height as well. So we need to get this down to 32. I just push it up, give it a little bit of a rub on the front so we can do a measurement. Yep, that's 32. That's exactly what I want. 32 up here as well. All right, so I will go ahead and push that through. When you're using the bandsaw, always use push sticks. Unless you've got quite a bit of room, you're pushing a big piece that you can get your hand plenty clear. Let's use push sticks. Here we have 32 on the nose, perfect, and 77 wide. So now we are going to take down this width a little bit. We need to get this to around 70, maybe 71, just so we can sand it down, accounting for any blade wander that we might have. Now the last thing that we're going to do on the bandsaw is get this to height. We could do all these on the table saw. The bandsaw is really our best option. Our plans say 85 millimeters, which is 80 millimeters for the block, 2.5 for the top, 2.5 for the back, which a total height of about 85. We want to give ourselves a little bit of room, a wiggle room, especially since this heel block is going to have the most radius on the bottom. You'll see what I mean when we get to that point, but we want to give ourselves a little bit of leeway there. So I shoot for 87, 88 millimeters to make sure that I've got that height that I can deal with that radius. And it does mean a little bit of work on the radius dish, but I think that's a fair trade-off because putting height back on this is not fun. We can do it, of course, but we really don't want to have to get to that. Perfect. We are going to take these back into the vise and work on getting these square, shaping them, and then we'll get to gluing them up. Right now we need to put a slight curve onto our tail block. Now if you look at this, the end of the guitar is not flat. It's not really flat. There's a slight continuous curve all the way through here. We need to take this and transfer that curve onto this and sand that into it or plane that into it. So we want to make sure that we have this marked so that there isn't any confusion as to where the end graft goes or to where we need to line up parts later. let's mark this out. 8, half a 76. We need to mark right at 38. My trusty mechanical pencil. Square this up. Do the same on this side, so that no matter which side we're looking at, top or bottom, we always know where that center is. Take this, we put it underneath, and I'm going to line that up on the center line. Now if you take a look at this, you can see there's just a slight curve to it there. The other nice thing about using this Baltic birch plywood is that I know I can use these layers to make sure that I'm centered, and when I'm planing things off or beveling things that I know I'm not getting one way or the other, I can even those cuts out on both sides. Now let's take this and plane this off and get this shaped. Before we do that, let's take a second real quick and talk about planes. I'm not sure how I could build a guitar without planes. In particular, just these small block planes. All kinds of different planes. There are a ton of them out there. I have grown very fond of these two particular planes. If there was one single plane that I had to have for everything that I was doing, it would have to be this. A Lee Nielsen 102, I believe. This particular one I use all the time. I use it for general woodworking. I use it in guitars. It feels great in the hand. It's not something I would use for smoothing or jointing or anything like that. But as far as the small pieces, shaping things, this is fantastic. It is much more expensive than the less expensive planes, but it keeps an edge better, and out of the box it's set up very well. Of course, that doesn't last very long because as we use them, those blades become dull, the beds become kind of banged up a little bit, and we have to resurface those. If you can afford a second plane, I would suggest one like this. It's a rabbiting plane. The edge is open so that you can get that edge right up against the surface that you're planing. In particular, this works great on necks and for mortise and tenon necks. You can get right up next to it on both sides. This works awesome. In general though, this is my go-to for almost everything. Now this particular piece of plywood is filthy. It was just a leftover from a jig that I was making, but it doesn't really matter because I'm going to plane all this off anyway and sand it up, so it kind of doesn't really matter what it looks like on this side. The other side looks just fine. Now with the plywood, since the grains are going back and forth, I'm a little less concerned about planing with the grain as I would be on this block. If I was using this block, I would want to make sure that I'm always going with the grain. If you go against the grain, perpendicular to the grain, you're going to end up with kind of a ragged edges. It's not going to look great, and it's not going to glue up quite as well. Now I've been just continually bringing it back to this form and shaping it. And so you can take a look at here's my center line. You can see that matches up pretty well. You can take a look at that and that. You can see right where that comes up to the edge, where the edges are going to meet down here. That's a nice crisp line. Follows the contour nicely, so I'm happy with that, and follows our pencil lines pretty well. So we're good. So let's see where we're at square-wise. Okay, well, not much I have to fix there. Or there. Or there. Okay. I don't have much to demo for fixing or squaring this up. Well, let's see where we're at, front to back. Ah, there we go. There's a gap. Okay, so we'll fix this gap. Not much of one, but we can do it. How's this? Yeah, even that one's flat. Square. Okay. Okay. I'm going to square this off real fast. And that actually took care of it. Square, square. Maybe we could be just a little bit. Yep. Block planes are awesome. Now that we have these blocks dimensioned the way we want to, we have the heel block square, we've got this curve in here, have our center line marked on here. We want to, or at least I want to, I'm going to put a bevel on this. So this inside edge that is nice and crisp and square except for the parts that it's dinged up, I'm going to put a bevel on this. So, well, one thing, it does look a little bit better. It looks a little more finished. But what that bevel does is it breaks this edge, and as we're working on these and messing around with the guitars, moving them in and out of molds, or just working on them, putting the kerfing, doing all the things that we need to do to build it. If you have a crisp edge like this, eventually it's going to get broken. It's going to get banged up, dinged up. A bevel is going to handle those much better. Keep in mind that when we put this in, make sure that this curved side is down and that we're beveling the part that's going to go on the inside of the guitar. I'm going to use the right plane for this. And what I am going to plane right here, but I'm not going to go all the way out, because if I go all the way out, we're going to have this side blowing out. And with these thin pieces, these blow out super easy. And even on the solid block of mahogany, if we scrape perpendicular to the grain like that, we're going to blow the top out. 45. Come back towards me. You can also use an edge sander for this. You can use just a random orbital around the side off, but I think it's really important to have this edge cleaned up. I just round mine over, so there's a nice pronounced round over. I don't do a big pronounced bevel like the plans show, although you can do that. Personal preference. You can see there's just a little bit of a bevel there. And I'm going to take a sanding block, clean that up, take off those just slight corners there, and finish this one up. That is ready to go in. All right, now for the heel block. Heel block. Let's get our center line. Well, first of all, let's establish which side is going to go on the inside. This side is going to be on my inside. This is going to be the outside. Doesn't much matter which side is up or down, but I'm going to have this be back. So our center line is going to be at 35. 35. All right, now we've got that all the way through. On the heel block, I do like to make this bevel a little more pronounced, and it's going to take me quite a while on a hand plane, although I can. So I am going to, I just tilted the bed on this bandsaw at 45 degrees, taking off just a slight corner here. That's about right for me. Taking off just this little bit, and then we'll flip it and do the other one. Now I'll just clean this up with a plane and some sandpaper, and this will be ready to go in. This I have sanded now to 150. Just kind of rounded those corners off, give them a nice soft edge. Looks good, happy with that. Now let's get ready to install. Here I have the sides in the form, and I've kind of loosely just placed the blocks on the heel and the tail. Make sure that when you get ready for this operation that the side you have for your top, the one that we know is totally flat, make sure that that's down resting on the bench, that your sides are pressed down into the mold, that they're nice and flat on the bench. This looks good. I really like the way this end came together. It looks like it actually matches up with the center line here, and same with this end. Now when we get ready to clamp these up, we're going to take some C-clamps, use a clamping caul, and we need to make sure that it's flexible. So I'm just taking an offcut from the sides. Remember, this has a curve to it, so if we used a rigid caul, we would end up snapping it or doing something bad to the sides or the block. So we're going to use a flexible clamping caul on this side. We're going to glue it up, clamp it, and then do the same thing to the other side. What we can do is we can get this side done. We'll do it here. We'll clamp it right here. We'll get this side, clamp it on the top. Then we will take it out of the mold and flip it over and clamp the other side. Now, one thing that you will find is that this is a very time-sensitive operation. The glue that we're going to use is just a standard yellow glue. I use Type Bond, just a standard yellow Type Bond. It works great. It's very easy. All right, so now I'm going to get the C-clamps set up. We're going to get ready for this operation. The last thing before we do that is that we want to make sure that underneath this that we have paper. Regular paper is fine. I'll probably use parchment paper since that's what I have handy. Something in between the guitar and the bench so that we don't glue our guitar down. That would be bad. Okay, everything's in place. Got the paper down. I've got all my clamps set up so that they're pretty close. I only have to screw them a few times. You want to make sure that all your clamps are set. I've got all my clamping cauls ready to go. Everything is pressed down. If you want to go through this and just double check, actually put the clamps down, go back and forth and try it and do a dry run. It's perfectly okay. Checking everything is probably a good idea. Right now, I'm going to glue this up and we're going to go for it. We don't need that much glue. You want to see, spread this out, make sure that it covers everything very well. Spread it all the way out to the edges. Clean it up away from the edges a little bit. And make sure that this lines up exactly where you want it to, this center line with the center line of the form. We'll put a clamping caul on the inside. Spring clamp right there. And get our first clamp on. And I want to focus on the outside edge. I want to make sure that edge is nicely seated. So put your clamp towards the outside. Make sure that that glue line is nice and crisp and happy. Cool. There we go. Do the same thing here. All the way out to the edges. Now this is lined up on the center line of the form. Clamping caul on that. One on the inside. Now this does get to be looking like quite the contraption once we have all these clamps in place. Relieve a little bit of pressure here and here. Take this out carefully, flip it over. Careful not to drop it and break everything. Come over to the other side. Put this clamping caul in place. That looks good. Okay, it looks like we are set here. Everything's in place. We've got just a little bit of squeeze out going on here, which is perfect. We want to see just a little bit. For the squeeze out, I will typically use one of these razors again. Now you can wait till it gels up a little on you, but there's so little of it that you can usually get right to it. All right, all the glue squeeze out is taken care of. Now I'm going to let this sit for about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and come back to it, and we'll take it out of the clamps, and then we'll be ready to put it back in the form. All right, it has been almost an hour. Be very careful with these as you pull them off. It's really easy to have them slip and smash down on the sides. And on these seams where the glue can possibly come through, you might have some stick a little bit. I did on the back, but it typically peels off just fine. Before we put it in the mold, I'm just going to scrape this off so we don't have any sticking to the mold itself. Now we're going back in the mold, and again keep track of what side is going to be the top, because that is going to go down. We want to reference the bench top and that flat top at all times. Now we can put the stretchers back in. Give them just a little bit of tension. We want to get the mold about halfway up the sides. Make sure we have the right side down. Yep. So top is down. Things are looking good. We can start taking a look at radiusing.